result where something actually materializes and happens in the world. And this is a harabama. This is something to really kind of compute. There are many that think, that speak, that contemplate, that pontificate, and then there are those that just do. And it's a beautiful thing. I thought I would just take a few minutes to touch on something that absolutely and unequivocally I know is swimming around in the minds of all of us, but that we are reluctant, and rightfully so, to really kind of grapple with and touch and percolate with. And I simply want to say the following to you, that while this perhaps is a somber subject matter that we need to explore, I absolutely will commit in true Hasidic fashion not to leave you at the bottom of the river with a hook. But absolutely we will journey out of these doors of this holy base medrash, b'simcha b'tuv levov. The Holy Baal Shem Tov, and we have a Messiah from the Baal Shem, communicates that when we read a parsha, when we learn a parsha, we lay in a parsha, not literally but figuratively. We live with a parsha of the week, of the Shavua, and the collective parshas of the month are essentially the conversation of the subconscious of our being. It's not that our lives happen to intersect this parsha and these segments of parsha, but actually entirely and precisely the antithesis. These parshas, the Torah Hadosha that we are swimming with now, in these months and these times, are that mechanism that is informing the essence of who we are. It is messaging us at the deepest conscious level of our being. And by the way, this is a general rule of thumb with the Jewish calendar in general. We don't come into Rosh Hashanah, come into Shavuos, come into Pesach. It comes into us. The famous story, by the way, of the Kotzker Rebbe. Someone brought the prodigy of Rishon to him and said to him, Rebbe, he's gone through Shas twice, Baal Peh, and he's only 11 years old. And the Holy Kotzker Rebbe pulled him aside and said, bring the child back to me when one letter of the Shas has gone through him. Torah is not a book of volume. Our experience with religious Torah engagement is not an encounter that infuses us and that excites us and motivates us per se. It is that thing which literally is responsible for the essence of who I am. It informs me, it moves me, it creates my thought, it messages the absolute essence of my conversation as a human being walking through the world. And here we are in one of the most celebrated parshas and collection of parshas, where we are literally in discussion about our national and our personal freedom. We are in the space as we come into Mitzrayim, as we leave Mitzrayim, as we have Mamash Yitzias Mitzrayim, nationally, collectively, and personally. And we are celebrating literally the DNA. Literally, we are celebrating the DNA of perpetual and eternal freedom. That never again will we be enslaved of body and mind. And that is what we are living and swimming with in these parshas. And here, my dear brothers, we are, each and every single one of us, experiencing some of the most difficult, emotional, psychological, theological conversations that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did not have. We are seeing things that are taking us to a place and a space of absolute upside-downness fundamentally. We are experiencing chakras. I mean, I'm talking about real chakras, not just inconsistency of behavior. I'm talking about the fundamental leaving off of primordial principles and values that are deeply embedded in our Torah, that have been handed handed down to us, generation. And we are seeing this paraded around as if there's something wrong with you, not with it. And this is happening in multiple areas of our lives. We are absolutely experiencing, we're intelligent people. You see this, you see what's happening now with this entire COVID situation, this Omicron, you see this? It's unbelievable. All the science, all the absoluteness that was presented to us for 2 years, literally, has been thrown out the window. You know why? Because there's a staffing crisis in healthcare. You know why? Because it's starting to hit the pocket of the federal government in a serious and significant way. And therefore, fundamental absolute science becomes negotiable. And that template has literally transferred itself to multiple destinations and spaces. And my friends, this has included our holy, divine, sacred, untouched space of Yahweh. We are thinking things and thoughts, exploring. We are having questions about fundaments of our Messiah that have been entirely off the table for even thought, let alone discussion, for 20 and 40 years, for 10 years, for 5 years, for a year, for 6 months. And the speed at which this is changing, we cannot keep up with. And things like we experience in the areas of science, of commerce, of sociological structure, things are coming out proving our initial gut thought correct. Things are coming to support the ideas and the thoughts that I'm having, to say, yeah, what about that actually? And we have a situation like we've experienced over the last 3-4 weeks with this Chai Walter situation, and you have someone like that who literally lives on the bookshelves of our homes, and therefore, by extension, in our hearts and our minds, and even more so, those of our children. And you literally one day to the next, you turn the page, and you're seeing things, and you're absorbing things that are outrageous, that your mind does not actually have a place to park, that you're not even sure if you have permission to engage. In fact, actually, as I'm standing here and saying this in real time right now, 80% of you are actually computing whether you should digest what's actually coming out of my mind. Because it's entirely antithetical and it is outrageous for consumption. But it is now part and parcel of our reality. And here's the big issue. If that is not so, if he is not so, if she is not so, if the president is not so, if the leading scientist is not so, if the leading economist is not so, if this great Rebbe is not so, and that great rabbi is not so, and this Moira is not so, then what is so? And maybe that's not so either. And as outrageous and as uncomfortable as I've made all of you, as you listen to these words literally dropping out of my mouth, and I can see the wheels and the cogs turning, as outrageous as that is, the antithesis and the other side of that coin is even more outrageous. And it is part of the conversation of our current existence. And not to touch and hold this nerve with not just one hand, but as my grandfather used to say, with both your hands, to touch the raw nerve is a magnificent waste of tragedy that Hashem has put in the world. There is something deep inside here that is an intrinsic opportunity for us, and I submit to you that no other generation actually prior to us has really had. Because it was an absolute struggle for body. It was a struggle for existence. It was literally a struggle to keep oxygen in your lungs and survive. This is not a kozak on a horse coming at you with a 4-foot sword. that wants to literally take your head off. That'll burn down your town, your shul, your community, your wife and children. That you can see coming, that you can put a label on, and that you can defend yourself against. This is an insidious microorganism mirrored in the world, literally, by the biological COVID organism, with a spiritual counterpart that is creeping in to the tiny conversation in our conscious mind. From the second you open your eyes to the second you close them. And by the way, even when they're closed. And then it gets echoed when you're at a Shabbos table, when you're in conversation with your children, when your wife, your spouse, ask, explore, question, when something comes back from the school, when a teacher says something that's totally outrageous, when a Rebbe says something, when someone who you've held up as an Adam Gadol is entirely and absolutely opposite thereof. What do you do with this? How do you park it? And how do I simultaneously work with that as a Lebedike Yid, walking through the world with passion and with energy, in love with the notion of a transcendent higher being that is my Father in heaven, and my royalty that has me move through the world as a prince of the Melech Malchei Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not schlepping azoi, but loud and proud with dignity, with finesse, with panache. How do I square that? It's literally collapsing around me. I share with you that there is a tiny, tiny little message that is buried inside of the opening pasuk of this week's parsha. That is an illuminating and a powerful paradigm shift that deals precisely and exactly with this issue. That will come to me and it will share with me that my mental anguish, my lockup, this experience that I have as a human being, where I'm experiencing contradiction at its most finessed and fundamental level, where it is literally insulting my intelligence to consume the news of the day, both physically and scientifically, and in any other ethically, as well as theologically. That does not stem with that. How did you get there? There is a tiny, beautiful idea that is buried inside of this parsha. Take a look at something. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's magnificent. The Holy Sfas Emes brings his Yortzeit this coming week. The Sfas Emes, the General Rebbe. Tonight, correct? That's it. What time is it? Good, yeah. Sfas Emes. That's Chidush Harim. Yeah. And but the Baba Sali too.
Sali was yesterday. Dalit Shvach.
Schus Yogan Aleinu Hashem, please help us bring this tremendous tzaddik. Schus that we should have Purim Hazar Gashmi.
Amen.
Watch something unbelievable. See, my conversation as a human being says the following. It says, this event, here's my life, I'm moving in a trajectory, and I have things that influence my life, that I import and export based on my interpretation of whether they're good or they're bad. How do I determine what's good or bad? Well, if you're a secular human being, you determine what's good or bad by virtues of society, or things specifically that your parents taught you. But if you're a Yid, you determine what's good and bad by what the Holy Torah Dosha says. Understood? Except that there is an enormously powerful mechanism that was actually created by the same God that created the Torah that will trip you up. And it is guaranteed absolutely to trip you up. And that is the deepest recess of your own mind. the illusion that it can create. That what you see is actually what you get. That a thing is as it is one of the deepest tripwires that a human being will experience. It's so significant that Hashem actually had to sow this in to Yitzias Mitzrayim. He had to have this dealt with in the entire story of the Exodus of Egypt, which, as we've mentioned, is a national exodus, but as well is a personal exodus, as is explained in Sfarim. Yitzias Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim Meloshin Meitzah, from that which constricts and constrains you, limitation, self-set limitation, narratives, notions, ideas, storytelling that we've onboarded from family mapping, from personal mapping, things that we have literally told ourselves are our reality, but in fact are not, are our single biggest tripwire. And the mind is such an incredibly powerful thing that an emotion that comes into us, we have the capacity to not only receive, but to absolutely believe is cast in stone and is total and absolute reality without negotiation. And this includes the realm of behavior, our own behavior. There are so many segments of things that we do as we move through the world as human beings that we very sophisticatedly justify as non-negotiable behavior on our part. They are quirks, they are elements, they are isms about us that just are the way we are. And what we have done with that is we have established them as concrete facts in our lives, as is. This I can work with, and I can evolve to, and I can mend, but this I cannot. This is reality. This is how a thing is. This is what actually happened. And I approach it, and I move through it, and I just have these two yin and yangs. This is what is, this is what I can work with and what I can change. And so I go through life. Says the Eibishter, says Hashem, an amazing